Now that's significant. The Market Research Podcast.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining us on this latest episode of Now That's Significant, a market research podcast. This is your host, Michael Howard, the head of marketing at Infotools. Today, we're joined by Kevin Karty, CEO of Intuify. Thanks for joining us on the show, Kevin.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me.
You're welcome. So, Kevin, what's the most significant thing you're going to tell us today?
Well, maybe a little bit controversial, but I think the big thing I would say is that surveys right now are really suffering some problems because generally the process of taking surveys is a very bad experience. So you could say that surveys are boring, they're antiseptic, and that's dramatically hurting our data quality and our ability to deliver the insights that are really the lifeblood of our industry.
Yeah, okay. So at a really high level, how would you address this?
Well, as an industry overall, we need to really care about the person on the other side of that survey, right? The person who shows up and says, I'm going to answer, 10 or 15 minutes questions. I'm going to give up a piece of my life to give you some information and, give you my opinion. And caring means looking at how we deliver those and using all the tools and technologies we have available to make that really engaging experience that allows people to share their thoughts, ideas, and feelings in an extremely efficient, intuitive, easy, and ideally fun way. And it benefits them, it benefits us a lot also, and it's something that we need to be doing.
Yeah, cool. So we've heard a lot of talk over the last, 100 years about data quality and its demise. So what's the state of the nation? Is it as bad as many claim? Are there any areas where we're actually doing better, for instance?
Well, I would say we have a lot of data cleaning tools, right? So we're very good at things like deduping, at digital fingerprinting, and it going through different models. We have a lot, our modeling technology is a lot more robust than it was even 10, 20 years ago. So on that side, I think we've improved. Interestingly enough, it's partly that improvement in the automation which is creating a little bit of a problem, because people are so over surveyed right now that that creates a lot of the challenges with trying to get high quality data.
So if we think about just stepping back from a design perspective, what are some of the pillars of survey design that we should be mindful of and just always helpful to be refreshed on?
So there's a lot on survey research and survey design, and without kind of going through like the basics you can read online. One thing that we need to do but haven't done well is sort of eat our own dog food. If in the market research industry, books like Thinking Fast and Slow, or System 1 and System 2 thinking have become almost a Bible of research, like really trying to get underneath the surface. We know that somewhere between 80 and 95% of decisions are made unconsciously. So, we're telling this to our clients and we're communicating to them that they need to really understand how consumers are making decision processes. But interestingly, if that is in fact how customers make decisions, how people think, why don't we take those insights and apply them to our own industry? So use these principles of research design, of sort of cognitive research, things like framing, things like fluency, or things like the focusing effect or skin in the game, to apply them to how we ask the questions in order to get better responses by helping people express themselves. We rely very heavily in the market research industry on standard scales, things like a 5-point scale. And if you go back and look at the origins of the 5-point scale, it was actually invented by this guy named René Likert, right? Hence the Likert scale. Back in 1932, during the Great Depression, And it was invented to gather, data on, basically government data, survey data. And since then, it hasn't really been modified. We kind of asked that question the same way.
91 years ago.
Yeah, almost 100 years ago. That's
Well,
right.
yeah.
And if you go forward in time, people would literally go around with clipboards and you'd send out government employees by clipboards, and they go and survey people out in the countryside or in the cities, and that's how they gather data. And of course, that's a very personal experience back then too. So we took that, we moved it onto phone, and we did random digit dialing and Karty. And it kind of transferred okay, but then you'd have to explain on a 5-point scale where 1 is this and 5 is this, how would you rate this? Right, on a phone. And, people got annoyed at that, but they tolerated it. And then we moved it online in the 1990s, and it's still the same 5-point scale. We found out it's so much cheaper to ask these questions online that we can do hundreds of surveys and get thousands of people to answer overnight and just blast these things out. And then as we move further into into the 2000s, things got better. People's expectations of a digital environment increased. You can see that in everything we do, from email to video games to movies online and so forth. And then it moved on to a phone. And we still do these massive surveys with 5-point grids that last 20 minutes, or rate this brand on 20 different dimensions. And now rate this second brand on 20 different dimensions. And now rate this third brand on 20 different dimensions. And here's 5 concepts, and rate it, likelihood to purchase in a 5-point scale. And what we find is that we get this flat blob of data that often isn't highly differentiating. People who want to give us their opinions are so unexcited they don't want to do it anymore because they're just bored and tired of it. Even people who start a survey end up finishing it and cheat or start racing halfway through the survey. SurveyMonkey did a meta-analysis a few years ago and found out by the time you're 20 minutes into a survey, 80% of people are just speeding through it, trying to get through it. And that's on paid panel surveys and regular surveys alike. So just we have all this, and yet if you look at a phone, right, it is an amazing way to engage people. There's so much in it that can help us understand what people are trying to communicate, whether it's through voice and video, or whether it's through interactive interfaces that feel like native applications where people can express. And you look at simple interfaces where people do express these things that people have built businesses around. So things like Tinder, right? Tinder's a response. It turns out that Tinder is a very addictive response, right? Even swiping releases dopamine. And even swiping negative releases dopamine. And then when you swipe negative, and you finally swipe positive, you get an even bigger dopamine hit. And so there are these ways of engaging that have been proven by others in the industry, not market research, that are very successful at eliciting very emotional, rapid response, system 1 feedback. And yet we're so scared to take advantage of all of that learning because we're kind of stuck on these antiseptic old ways of delivering these surveys because, well, that's the way it's done, and that's the way all the textbooks are written, even though the textbooks were written 30 years ago. And so that's a lot of what we focused on, right? But when we see others focusing on it as well, it's a huge need in the industry because without that, we are going to poison the well. Right? We're going to destroy the lifeblood of our industry, which are people willing to actually take a 15 or 20-minute survey.
So you mentioned briefly about eating our own dog food. When was the last time you took a survey?
Every day.
Yeah.
we do a lot of our own. We actually we just had a client, and this is a long survey we're in the middle of right now. We have one of our active projects, and it's like a 20-25 minute brand survey with tons of imagery and really engaging interactions. And we did one of those status meetings where you show it to the senior management, SVP level. And usually when you do that, the last thing you want to do is actually walk them through a survey demo, because if they knew where their data was coming from, they'd be terrified. Okay. So we walked through a survey demo during this meeting, And, and SVP is like, I really want to take that. Can I get that link after this meeting's over? That's not a response that you typically get, in a meeting with a high level, like an SVP level person. And that's what it should look like, right? That's what taking a survey should look like. But it takes effort and creativity and work. And obviously we think that it's worth it, particularly if you can build the technology to support it. But it's a sort of it's a battle sometimes to convince people that it is.
Yeah. So I guess that's a good point. Do you want to just share a little bit about Intuify, its origins, its story, and what you're up to today?
So twist my arm. I'm a founder. Founders love talking about their companies. So we're about 3.5, 4 years old. My personal background is pretty deep in market research. I've been through startups before, and Intuify came out of this observation that surveys are actually a growth industry, right? It's considered old tech, but it hasn't changed in a while. And if you could change, like I mess with data, I'm a modeler, right? And I spend so much time dealing with bad data. And I keep telling myself, like, if only I had better data, I wouldn't have to run these crazy models to try and extract this tiny little signal and get an answer to a client, right? If I just had better data. And so that's like, well, okay, why don't we just go get better data? That was, that's kind of the background. And we have since then, we spent like a 1.5 years building, this engaging technology platform that is completely multimedia, so and totally seamless. And our goal was taking a survey should not feel like taking a survey. It should feel, I don't want to say gamify it, but it should feel like an interactive way of expressing myself that just happens to generate this really, really high quality data that we can use to answer these questions and build these insights, right? But that was the goal. And I'd like to think we sort of partly love that, but we are very much a technology-led company. We're very deep in market research. We're not a venture capital-backed company. We're totally bootstrapped. And we kind of like it that way because it gives us the latitude to really care about our clients. And if we see, something that's meaningful, we can pursue it and really do it the right way rather than having to hit certain arbitrary milestones, which are, set by investors or, venture capitalists to say, well, you have to do this. And that's been really, really nice and incredibly rewarding, as we kind of grow this company.
Yeah, cool. I always have a lot of goodwill for people that do see a need or a problem and actually do something about it, because there's no shortages of ideas in the world, but for people that actually put a stake in the ground and say, yep, this is me, I'm going to do something about it. Well done.
Well, likewise to you guys too. So
yeah.
I mean, definitely hats off.
Cool. So now, as you're aware, we could talk for hours when it comes to improving data quality across the industry. We're just going to focus on surveys for now. To get, I guess, to continue the ball that's rolling, do we have a moral obligation to survey takers?
Oh, that's a good question. So some people would say no. So let me answer it this way, right? So if you think about a survey and you think about the human cost that goes into answering the survey, it can be staggering. So we ran a survey not too long ago with almost 3,000 respondents, and it was a 20-minute survey, right? And if you think about 3,000 response in 20-minute survey, that means it's 1,000 hours of survey response time. So when I push that button and send it out to the panelists, we pay several $1,000s to the panelists and the panel to deliver that. But 1,000 human hours went into that. That's like employing somebody for half a year. And if you think about how those people are spending their time, how much human effort it goes into generating that data that gives us our insights, you kind of have to think that we owe it to them, particularly if they're clients, the customers and customer list, absolutely we owe it them to put in, I don't know, if they're giving us 1,000 hours, maybe we should put in at least 20 hours to make the survey a little nicer for them. Just 20 hours, a sliver of the amount of time that they're actually giving us. But there's this, I sometimes feel like there's a callousness in our industry. Like I pay for these people, they're a commodity. I can buy them off of a marketplace. And, this is a bit dehumanizing in terms of how we treat respondents on surveys, which has repercussions. And so I guess the answer is yes, I do think there's a moral obligation to treat them as human beings, which is how they are. And, really think about like that experience and how they're spending their lives, because it affects people in a pretty big way. So I guess the answer is definitely yes.
It would be pretty fascinating to, you could have a control group, I guess, if you pushed out a survey. So 1,000, you could go 1,000, 1,000, 1,000. You could have 20 hours of survey work. You could have an extra 10 hours on top of that, an extra 10 hours on top of that, improving, and then just have a look at the data quality that you get across those. And you could have some quite good insights into the benefits of.
Yeah. I mean, we do a lot of quick and dirty work, and that's incredibly valuable, but there is a downside to it. And when I say we, I mean, the industry is sort of like faster, better, cheaper, or at least faster, cheaper. Let's just say, I don't know if it's better, but faster, cheaper has become a mantra. And it certainly has its place. But higher quality is also, really, really important. And we have the technology to do it. But, I always wonder, like, why do we put so little technology against the higher quality and so much technology against faster, cheaper?
Yes. So 3-question surveys are nice, but 10 and 20 plus minute surveys, they're not going away, even though respondents struggle. How can we fix that?
I mean, so part of it is question design, right? And the interface. So typically on a mobile survey, you expect things to take longer when you're delivering the survey, particularly things like grids or complex questions. And so, like, we have risks in that. It's to some point where, like, you have some questions like you can't even deliver on a mobile device. But mobile technology is, like, particularly UX technology, is incredibly advanced. And when you apply it properly, the first thing is you can take a 20-minute survey, and we consistently do this across interfaces, and you can drop it down by 30% just by making the engagements faster. And we've shown this. Like, we've delivered like 20-minute path to purchase surveys on auto insurance in 14 minutes, which is 30% less time. And at the end of this, and these are surveys on like auto insurance, right? It's like, it's not the most sexy and exciting thing in the world. It's not like, new fashion or even new food or, politics that people love to talk about, right? These are like, it's auto insurance. And at the end of that survey, people will come back and say, wow, this is one of the best surveys I've ever taken. And they'll tell us that, because it was faster and easier and engaging, and actually let them express themselves in a way that, and this is a quote from that did not lock them into a box to check, right? That ability to express themselves, to like humanize the survey experience, goes a long way to winning over the folks who, are trying to give us their opinions. And so, part of it's like that. If we're smart, we can cut the time without actually cutting the data, right? In fact, we get better data, much better data. And then, the second part is if you just put some experience into making it engaging and entertaining and something that doesn't feel arduous, it doesn't require you to work to answer a survey, then it also just has a massive impact. And that idea of work is like incredibly important. A 5-point scale, like scientific survey, and I say that in scare quotes because there's no such thing as a truly unbiased survey, right? It really comes down to like, what does it give you? What data does it give you? Is it useful? But their work, like, it's tedious and taxing to take them, and they shouldn't be. It should be something they do almost for fun, right? because I can say something, or maybe it's about an interesting topic. And the more you can make it like that, the more, even if they're spending 14 minutes instead of 20, but the more the subjective time gets reduced. And the more they're kind of in the flow, there's this like flow state that we can preserve. The more they communicate, the more honest they are, the more they tell us, things that maybe they otherwise would self-censor. So all of that becomes critically important in, turning this 20-minute survey instrument into something that gives us, not just much better insight, but, also like a better relationship with the person on the other end of this device that's trying to have this conversation with us. It's mediated through, this digital interface.
So mobile, you've obviously touched on quite a lot here. How is mobile changing the survey industry? What are some of the benefits that we've seen on it?
That is a great question, and there's academic research coming out that's starting to dig into this a little bit too. So here's a frightening statistic, right? The average person in the U.S. taps, swipes, or touches their phone 2,200 times per day. They also spend on average 4 hours on their phone, and most of that time is personal time, right? So doing personal activities. If you look at computers like you and I are using right now, they spend a roughly equivalent amount of time in the vast majority of it is work time, often with like a VPN access or security on their computer. And that's the relationship we have with this device. It's a very formal device where I'm putting on a face. Phones know more about us than our best friends. Right? It's scary how much they actually know about us when you think about it. But that relationship is beneficial in many ways, because we have seen, and their studies have shown this, people are more honest when they're answering questions on their phone than they are on other devices, and because of that personal relationship. So there's a huge opportunity to really get more personal, to get more immediate, to get more authentic. And then the other thing is, if you're not doing surveys on phones, you're missing 60% of your survey audience these days. So as of a few years ago, people now, even the US, take surveys more on mobile than they do on desktop. It's 60% in the US. In other countries like Latin America, where the infrastructure is more mobile focused, it's like 80%. And so if you're delivering a survey that's optimized for desktop and just kind of squeezing it into mobile and it's kind of sort of doing an okay job, you're doing yourself and your respondents and your clients a disservice, because it's just not how people engage. And you're losing the opportunity to actually get better information and better data. And then the other thing about mobile devices, in addition to the interfaces and the capability just to make it an incredibly engaging tactile touch swipe experience, which is much more immediate than like navigating a mouse, which is mentally removed. You're doing this mental translation or mapping. It's just much more sort of connected. You also are guaranteed to have built-in camera, built-in audio, built-in voice, and potentially other things if you want to use them in your device, in addition to things like geolocation. So the capabilities in that device are just incredible, and they really are. In spite of a lot of conversation, we're still using, most of us are using a sort of just the surface level of what those devices have to offer in terms of what they can do to help us, in the insights world.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And when you also see some people like making use of smartwatch data as well, like health tracking. When you're merging all of that kind of thing in with your surveys too, you can get some really fascinating insights.
Yeah, that's super cool stuff, right? That's super cool stuff. I mean, you have some privacy issues you have to start, being very, very transparent on there.
Yeah.
But people are addressing that, and I think that's making progress.
Yeah. So, I mean, the goal, I guess you'd say, for most researchers is to have engaging surveys. Like we want great quality out of what we're doing. What are some ways that we can make our surveys more engaging in this current environment?
So even with standard survey technology, right? I would not underestimate the use of imagery it's extra work to put in images, and even things like thank you or welcome images are helpful. Humor is actually helpful. It's one of those things that activates, your brain and causes you to pay more attention. And there's a few other things that we typically don't use that cause people to pay more attention, like images of naked people. But leaving that aside, humor is pretty darn good at causing people to really focus their attention. Whether that's a meme or just being friendly, so not being quite so formal. Again, this notion of being antiseptic. Um, but anything we can do along that line, and it goes a long way to keeping people engaged and focused. And then within the context of other things, reading questions, shortening questions, being simplistic, all the standard stuff that you want to do, right? That's varying the activity, trying to avoid overuse of grids, or at least to creatively use grids in different ways. I mean, we use a lot of grid questions, but like most of our grid questions, you would never actually even know that they're grid questions. Like you, even after you take the survey, if I were to tell you that was a grid question, you'd be like, oh, that was a grid question, wasn't it? I didn't even realize it when I was taking it, just because of how you're managing the interaction and the expression. So there's a lot, I think, that can be done, across all the ranges of technology development, even with pretty basic platforms and activities. Yeah, so I think that would be a starting point.
So, transparency time. Have you ever had a picture of a cat or kittens in your surveys?
Yes.
Awesome.
There's some fun ones. I would say my favorite are the memes. Like
Yeah.
memes. I love putting memes in surveys just because because it just activates. So for instance, if you're like changing how you just said, hey, we know that this brand doesn't offer this product, but what if it did? Or like when we go through like a voice activation and people test out the voice data and they're like, wow, it worked, and we show like an image of like of the actor from, I can't remember his name, from like Back to the Future, right?
Yeah.
And there's like, it's got the big hair and everything. It's just stuff to keep the mood a little bit light. But yeah, definitely cats.
Awesome. So you recently presented at a conference with one of your clients and a success story that you've had working with them. Do you mind sharing a little about that and some of the results that you got from it?
Yeah, that was a fun one. So we presented at Quirks LA, and I love Quirks. Quirks is a fantastic conference because it's not too large. It's very, I mean, it really is market research focused, and the people who go there are really sincere. So we were fortunate to be able to present at Quirks, and we had Pepsi or PepsiCo, right, as our client, which given our size was fantastic. That they actually offered to present with us, which was like amazing. So we got to present. Mo Hassan was co-presenter. Mo is just an incredibly innovative guy at Pepsi, and they were doing an incredibly hard project, which was focused on a new brand. They're trying to figure out what brand position they take, and they had some really radically different ideas, and this is incredibly important. So there's a ton of metrics that they're measuring. They need to understand how this brand translates across all these different types of media, not just on the product, but also in digital and in physical media. And so they have to measure all of this at once, and they have to get the emotions because it's an incredibly emotional brand, right? It's very focused on how people think and feel and culture. And it was, they also had subsets of unacculturated Hispanics and very difficult to reach audiences. This is the perfect storm of, this is like an incredibly complex, tough market research project. So they worked with us, which we were shocked at. We were like, great, wow, I can't believe we actually got a chance to work on this with them. Turns out that they had asked 12 other vendors who all rejected it and said, we can't do that, which is why they came to us. And so that was, we found that out afterwards, but that was pretty awesome. So when we presented, obviously it went very well. We had great audience feedback. Being on stage with Pepsi certainly helps, and one of the most eye-opening things was when we're on stage, and this is the first time we sort of shared what our technology does. we sort of go behind the pain point and the things that were driving the challenges in the survey. It's like, okay, what we typically do when we get this survey with like hundreds of grid questions and trying to get emotions, and like there's so much you're trying to pack in the survey, is we just like throw a ton of cheap panel at it, and we throw a ton of bad questions on it, and then we hope that we get something at the end that can tell a good story, right? And that's kind of the typical way of approaching it. And I could see everybody in the audience like groaning and like looking away, embarrassed, because like we all know that we do it, because like we don't really have a choice. Like we got to get the data somehow. And so I think there is, like, people in market research don't like doing bad surveys. Nobody likes doing boring surveys, but there's almost like, well, we don't have a choice, right? And so that's one of the cool things about we get to do is like we get to open people's eyes and say, okay, imagine if you did, like, you could deliver an incredible experience like this, what would it do? I mean, of course, then we went on and showed the data, and we showed the impact that the data had, or the impact that the interfaces and the engaging experiences had on the data quality, which was impressive. You're obviously, anyone's welcome to come to me and see if they want to see what that looks like. And having Pepsi sort of stand up and say, first of all, this is amazing, but also like when they showed the Senior Manager, they're kind of like blown away. And one of the things that, again, this is going back to what you can do on mobile. We had 20,000 voice responses about different versions of the brand positioning, like different versions. 20,000 voice responses, about a third of them in Spanish, right? So one is, you're talking to real people, and like that's not a small thing these days, to actually know you're talking to real people. And the second thing is, when you get these conversations and people tell you what they think, and you can hear it, and you can then share those very emotional responses with your management to convey the meaning, that's incredibly powerful. And then you have tons of what we call unstructured data, which means you can take those 20,000 voice responses, and the technology these days to transcribe and then code automatically and categorize, and then run sentiment analysis and all that stuff. You can do so much with that unstructured data to answer questions you did not even think to ask, which we got. Like, after they ran this big project and had to make this decision, like, all in this incredibly short time span, we forgot to ask something, right? There's this element in one of these designs that ended up being the top design that, is really, really controversial. We did not ask a question about it because we weren't sure that would end up being the top design. So is there anything that you can tell us? And the cool thing is you can go back to 20,000 voice responses and mine 20,000 detailed voice responses and basically get an answer, quantitative answer, without having to rerun, a survey. And that's kind of mind-blowing. So that was really exciting. I mean, I guess it's a very long-winded answer to say, yeah, it was really, really fun to present at Quarks. So
yeah, cool. Hopefully more to come. So you touched on AI. I mean, it's hard not to ignore the open AI, generative AI, chat GPT discussions that's been happening lately. I know countless market research teams and professionals are thinking, what's this all going to mean for us? Have your thoughts on this, some of the things you've been hearing in the industry?
Yes. And I know a lot of people who are on the very, like, some super smart people who are on the very cutting edge. We're obviously doing a lot of stuff on it ourselves because we have so much amazing data that's like hard to analyze. And one of the interesting things is that ChatGPT is so easy to use. It's really democratized analytics. So people who don't have an analytics background can still use ChatGPT. I think that's going to be amazing. Right. And we're already starting to see that have an impact and build like technical solutions, with minimal knowledge. I won't say minimal knowledge, with minimal statistical training. I have a lot of knowledge, but minimal statistical training. So I think that's amazing. I mean, there are dark sides to it. One of the things that's been raised as a potential challenge is like ChatGPT is very good at coming up with open text answers. And so like if you're using open-ended answers as a way to screen out cheaters, that's going to disappear as a mechanism to screen out bots and cheaters if it hasn't already very shortly, because it's fairly easy to bypass those. And then people are like, well, you can use ways to like detect ChatGPT responses. Like, yeah, but you can also tell ChatGPT to bypass those ways of detecting the ChatGPT responses. It's like, answer this question as if you were a 13-year-old with broken English. You can totally do that, and it will do it. So like, so it's kind of like it's like a game of warfare out there. Like each side makes innovation, the other side matches it. So I think that's the dark side. Positive side is like summarizing. I think one of the big early applications is going to be summarizing insights. So here's the data, summarize these insights. I think I've seen a lot of folks on that side. And then there's other stuff in terms of how you create the surveys, right? That is starting to influence as well. So and I don't want to give up any IP that of the folks that we've spoken to, but it is amazing. And I certainly hope that the benefits are there. It's hard to anticipate what the changes and like how it's going to affect people's jobs on a day-to-day basis are going to be. It's definitely not going to replace people, but it will change workflows.
That's true. I think one thing that I'm always aware of is that AI will only ever be as good as the data that it is trained on, and often it will take you got your typical bell curve, so it'll just be trained on what's in the middle of the bell, and innovation, etc., happens on the edges. So that's what people can offer and add. Like, what if we did something different? What if we tried this instead of that there? So there's still always going to be that human element that is going to challenge the status quo. And so for people that see gaps, see opportunities, that our role's going to still be there, and that human element is not going away.
Oh yeah, and actually gets kind of cooler on the edge because you can automate, you can move faster. You can automate the things that slow you down with things like ChatGPT. I mean, the magnitude of ChatGPT is kind of impressive. It moved, and I'm in the analytics space, so I would say we used to see companies saying we do AI, and I'm like, every time a company claims to do artificial intelligence, I'm like, oh, I'm sick of it, just so sick of it, because it's not real AI, and they're usually making claims that are far in excess of what they can really support. ChatGPT is different. ChatGPT 4, I should say. Like if you look at the size, just the magnitude of the model and how much bigger it is, it's like 1,000 times bigger than the parameter space in ChatGPT 3, and that was in 6 months. And ChatGPT 5 could be another 3, 4, 5 orders of magnitude bigger, and it makes a difference. It's like it really is like a step change, I think, in the generality of AI and what you can do with these. But you're right, it doesn't replace the people on the edge of the bell curve. There's no
true.
I can do that. It's a consistent B plus. Like
nice. So antiseptic surveys. What's flying under the radar with the industry? What are we ignoring when it comes to presenting the best possible experience for our respondents?
So I think we're a bit stuck, right? Even people who want to change are hesitant to change. Even if they want to do something better, they're hesitant to do so because partly I think of tradition, right? Well, this is, I don't want to have to justify to a client why I want to do something differently when they've already bought into this thing they've been doing for 10, 20 years. So why have that conversation? It's an easier sell if I just do it the way everyone's done, and it's less work. So I think part of it's there, and then part of it is this residual fear of inconsistency, right? And so you think about a tracker, and some companies have been running these brand trackers or awareness trackers or media trackers for like 20 years. or they're running NPS trackers. And here's the thing about NPS trackers: their compensation or bonuses may very well be linked to the outcome of these trackers. And so, the question of is it better data is almost a secondary question to, well, what's it going to do to my metrics? Do I really want that better data, or do I just want to keep doing something consistent? But it's almost like a truism in brand trackers. It's flying under the radar. Everyone kind of knows it, but like, you almost never see anything in a brand tracker until it's way too late to do anything about it. Like, by the time something is like, something's big enough to show up in the brand tracking metrics, which are just a really blunt instrument, very rarely do you have enough early warning to actually make a change to prevent it. And so I think that's it's under the radar. It's again, it's sort of like it's one of these elephants in the room. It's like everyone knows it, no one really wants to talk about it because it's kind of an inconvenient truth to talk about. I hope that we're getting better about that. I do hope. I do see some progress being made there, but it is a bit slow.
Finishing on a positive note, not that that wasn't necessarily the opposite. No, it's okay. No, more in the terms of, like, we often talk about the challenges of market research and what the issues are. So on a positive note, what happens when we get surveys right from both an organization and a consumer perspective?
There's this awesome feeling of delight. And it's kind of the same feeling when you deliver this insight to a client that just opens their eyes. And when you get a survey right, when you capture the emotion, you get the data correct, and you share that, you can see somebody's world expand, right? You can see them, have this eye-opening experience. And I think from a user side, it's the same delight where they get to express an idea. It's like I've had these thoughts, and finally I can actually get them out in a way that that actually makes sense. And then on the client side, it's wow, this actually makes sense, and I believe it. I'm not like sitting there puzzling, and it's like, yeah, I get it now. One example is we did a survey, and it was on a bill. Right, a telecommunication bill, and not the most interesting thing to talk about, right? But because of the way we asked the survey, it's like we got people talking about their telecommunication bill and the frustrations, and like people actually talked about this a lot. And then the answers that came out, we were testing different ideas or concepts, and you wouldn't think this is important, but it's a bill is like one of your most important marketing pieces to your customers, because guess what? It's the thing they open up every single month and look at. Like, you get eyeballs on your brand every month when you send the bill. And so if you can make improvements, it's kind of massive. And so we're testing a bunch of different things, and obviously the CEO had their favorite, and this is a big CEO, and we came out with the one that won was not the CEO's favorite, but we had clear insights and voice, and like you just had the data so clear, and it's so tangible because of the way people we capture data and communicate that, and you carry that through to senior management, and you get this answer from like the CEO of the company is like, wow, yeah, let's go with that one. It makes sense. I believe it. And that's the real voice of the customer. Like, literally, that was a quote. That's the real voice of the customer. And then you get like, our client coming back in the insights profession, like, hey, my CEO loved it. And that's like incredibly gratifying, because, that's the person that hired you, that put their faith in you, and you get to make them into a hero. And it's kind of like this win-win-win across the board. Like, you're doing essentially good in the world, right? Because the people who are taking the survey are happy, your client's happy, the management's happy. I guess the competitors might be less happy, but like, other than that, and that's amazing. I mean, it really is amazing.
No, true. And some people like focusing on competitors, some people like focusing on their customers. I mean, it's a knife edge, sitting on the fence kind of thing, but great when the customers can be represented well there. So
So thank you for inviting me on. It's a great conversation. I'm glad you're doing this. I think it's a fantastic service to the industry, to be able to provide like this kind of forum. And if you have any more questions, or I guess if folks in the audience wanted to hear more about this, always happy to share. We're pretty transparent, pretty open, and love talking about this stuff.
No, thank you for joining us, Kevin. And if I can quickly just recap what we have talked about today. So it's on the surveys of on the topic of surveys, and how we need to ensure that we're producing the most engaging surveys as possible, for the benefit of not just our clients, so brands, but also for consumers as well. So when we do that, we can get better answers, we can get more, have far more confidence in the insights that we produce. We can even incorporate a whole lot of this design and modern thinking into historical, traditional research as well. So you mentioned, Kevin, that you can create 5-point scale questions without them feeling like 5-point scale questions. So, which is really good. We can reduce the lengths of our surveys as well. And if you think about that S-curve drop-off of engagement, time and quality, then shortening the time there can definitely help us to keep up our data quality that we're getting out of it and get more completed surveys as well. Talked about the power of technology as well in all of this as well. How if we can get people responding on mobile phones, it's often ideal, considering that that's the only place where some people will. So we need to make sure that we are getting good representation again across both. The fact that you can be multilingual as well, the benefits that you've had with your voice completes as well, which is really interesting, and the potential longevity of that data for pulling insights as well. So yes, we're very thankful for you joining us on the show, Kevin. Anyone that wants to check out what Kevin and the team at Intuify are doing, feel free to check out the show notes. We'll have some links in there. So thank you so much for joining us, Kevin.
It is my absolute pleasure. Thank you.
You're welcome. And thank you for joining us on Now That's Significant.